Once upon a time in Japan, a life simulating video game was created by Nintendo. Nobody ever imagined that one day this famous video game would be known as Animal Crossing. But how did Animal Crossing become so popular? Why did it become so popular? Is the diorama set really based on real world culture? Is it true that Chip is not a beaver? And why was Animal Crossing New Leaf called New Leaf? Is it true that younger female players are more scared of Mr. Rossetti? It's time for me to answer all these questions and more, since this is ASMR. Aaron, back at it again with another daily video to help you relax. So lay back and enjoy the ride. I hope this read helps you get you through your day, or even better, I hope this video helps you gently fall asleep. I can't wait to get started. This is the tale of Animal Crossing.
Once upon a time in Japan, a life-simulating video game was created by Nintendo. Nobody ever imagined that one day it would become the famous video game known only as Animal Crossing. But how did Animal Crossing become so popular? Why did it become so popular? Is the Dharma set really based on real-world culture? Is it true that Chip is not a beaver? Why was Animal Crossing New Leaf called New Leaf? Is it true that younger female players are scared by Mr. Rossetti? It's time for me to answer all these questions and more, since this is ASMR Aaron, back at it again with another daily video to help you relax. So lay back and enjoy the ride. I hope this video gets you through your day, or even better, I hope this read helps you gently fall asleep. I can't wait to get started. This is the tale of Animal Crossing. Like most games made by Nintendo, the story of Animal Crossing, Nintendo's charming social life sim series, begins in Japan, with a man named Katsuya Iguchi. After he nabbed a job at Nintendo in 1986, he was forced to move away from his hometown of Chiba and relocate to Kyoto, the city where Nintendo was, and still is, based. Iguchi worked on several projects hither and thither, notably as a level designer for Super Mario Bros. 3, but the move to Kyoto stuck with him even after he had settled in, and it was a primary influence upon the creation of Animal Crossing. Joining forces with the ever-excellent Takashi Tezuka, Iguchi began the series with Dobutsu no Mori, a Japan-exclusive game for the N64, which roughly translates to Animal Forest in English. The game was originally planned to be released for the 64DD, an add-on which sat under the N64 and took advantage of rewritable, whizzy, spinny discs that could hold a lot more data than a cartridge. Unfortunately, the expansion was a commercial disaster, and after countless delays and other problems, Nintendo decided to slap it in a cartridge instead. There was an issue with this, however, as the game relies heavily on a real-time clock, which the 64DD offered, but the N64 lacked. Therefore, Nintendo did the only sensible thing and stuck a clock inside the game cartridge. Whilst it worked for the most part, relying on such a solution meant that should the battery run out, there'd be no way for the game to track the time when you weren't playing, which is a significant issue given that it was one of the game's biggest features. The initial release on N64 launched in Japan on the 14th of April 2001, but it wasn't long until a new and improved version called Dobutsu no Mori Plus released for GameCube in December of the same year. The fact that the GameCube actually had a clock in it made fabricating discs easier and cheaper than producing most cartridges for the older, aging Nintendo 64, even if the upgraded games still looked very much like an N64 title. The GameCube version also came with a selection of new stuff as well, much of which has remained throughout the entire series, including Tortimer, Cap'n, the Able Sisters, and the museum. Suffice it to say, if you bought the N64 original and then saw this less than 9 months later, you'd probably feel a bit miffed. Still, it's hard to stay mad while playing Animal Crossing. The success of the game caught the interest of some other Nintendo employees outside Japan, and despite the mountains of dialogue and text that had to be localized, Nintendo of America set about making what most of you reading will recognize as Animal Crossing for the GameCube, with its classic tagline, "Population Growing," that still gets ignored to this day. Not only did they translate everything, but they also decided to add in other things, such as new holidays. The original game was very Japan-centric when it came to annual festivals, but adding in things like Toy Day, Christmas, and Halloween, helped to make the game more recognizable and relatable to a Western audience. Animal Crossing launched in North America less than a year following its Japanese counterpart, on the 16th of September 2002, although Europeans had to wait a further 2 years to get their first taste of animal forest life. The game was well received, but more interestingly, the Japanese portion of Nintendo were so impressed with Nintendo of America's additions that they decided to take all the new content from the Western release, plus a bit extra, and release yet another version of the game called Dobutsu no Mori E+, a year before the European release. The game was even released on the iQube player in China in 2006, so perhaps Europeans should count themselves lucky they didn't have to wait until after that launch to play. The game was a hit, and dominance over the debut simulator genre had been established, so it was time for a proper sequel. Even though the game had started out small and local, Animal Crossing's success was global, so when it came time to make a sequel, Iguchi made sure to change things around for as broad a demographic as possible. Everything from fish to bugs to fossils to holidays were redesigned with an international, multicultural market in mind. The platform choice was a bold move as well, as even though the GameCube had sold a respectable number of units, this new game would be shrunk down onto the tiny Nintendo DS instead. Despite its size, the DS packed quite a punch, features-wise, including built-in features that the GameCube didn't possess, like a microphone you could use to scream at other villagers to find out where they were. Parents loved that. Animal Crossing Wild World also had the major advantage of not having to rely on being plugged into the wall at all times, meaning you could take your village with you wherever you went. The DS also technically had Wi-Fi capabilities, so you could visit other people's villages locally or non-locally, using the patented friend code system, and even send them charming or rude messages. The game was a smash hit, and thanks to the overwhelming success of the DS in all its third pillar glory, superseded the original release financially and critically. Taking the winning formula and improving on almost every aspect in a handy portable package was a no-brainer to consumers, and the series' relaxing gameplay appealed to the same broad demographic of players attracted to the Nintendo DS by games like Brain Training and Nintendogs. Players who might never have sat down to play something on GameCube, but were willing to try something new on DS. There were a few issues, however. With the introduction of the new whiz-bang internet, Nintendo had the ability to distribute letters containing gifts to people fancy enough to have a connection, and they did so. One gift, called Red Tulips, came with a blank letter, and after placing the mysterious object in your home, not only would it be invisible, but the game still thought there was something there, so you couldn't move through it. Whatever was there couldn't be touched or moved, so you weren't able to pick it back up either, meaning you now had an invisible blockade in your home. Nintendo's response was swift, and its solution to the problem simple. Don't open the letter and just throw the item away. Genius. Wild World was a marvel back in the day, a handheld jewel that married the charm of the series with the convenience of portability. The Wii U Virtual Console version neutralized that convenience somewhat, but this entry sucked hundreds of wonderful hours from us back on DS. Portable play is well and good, but what if you had a real hankering for that classic big screen experience on your 12-inch CRT with only one working speaker? With the 2006 launch of the Wii came a 2-year wait before the series returned to home consoles with Animal Crossing Let's Go to the City, or at least that's what it was called in Europe. In North America, it went by Animal Crossing City Folk, because Nintendo of America refused to publish any game with more than 5 words in the title. To be honest, we endorse such practices and wish they were still employed. It would avoid multi-syllable embarrassments like Cadence of Hyrule, Crypt of the Necrodancer featuring The Legend of Zelda, or that Dragon Quest XI, the longest title in the history of the world ever, definitive edition. If the name didn't give it away at all, Let's Go to the City allows you to venture outside the peaceful tranquility of your town, and yes, go to the city. That was about the only major difference between this and Wild World, though, and the game was criticized for being too similar to its predecessor. Part of that may be because it's based on exactly the same game engine as the DS version. You could have more villagers, your own home, rather than sharing one with anyone else who had a character in the game, but much of City Folk was subject to only very minor changes. One area touted as an improvement over Wild World was the Wii Speak peripheral released alongside this new Wii game. This was essentially a big microphone that you could place near your TV and talk to people as though they were in the room with you. That was Nintendo's plan, at least. In reality, it was a largely disappointing, low-quality microphone that forced you to shout at your TV rather than just whisper delicately into a headset. Not that people didn't shout into headsets. The Wii Speak only ever supported 13 games, and it's not hard to see why. But what about the headlining trip to the city? That must be exciting, right? Well, you could buy clothes, change your hairstyle, or fashion yourself a Mii mask, talk to special characters. The city area basically freed up your town to be more focused on your villagers, rather than cluttering it all up with shops. As an idea, it works well enough, but it also feels strangely disconnected to your actual town, and left it feeling somewhat empty at times. It's certainly not the bustling MMO metropolis you might have hoped for. Consequently, Animal Crossing Let's Go to the City ends up as one of the lesser games in the series, as it didn't really push any boundaries beyond what had already been done before. That's not to say Nintendo didn't put work into the Wii entry. According to the game's Iwata Asks interview, it features the equivalent of 4,000 pages worth of text. But in a series of slow and steady iterations, City Folk was the slowest and steadiest of Animal Crossings. If it was your only Animal Crossing game at the time, you would probably have been more than happy with what you had, though. Still, it wouldn't be long before you could start over again. Whether or not Let's Go to the City's lukewarm reception was a reason or not, the next game in the series returned to a handheld, specifically the Nintendo 3DS. Animal Crossing New Leaf took even more inspiration from around the world, and squeezed it all onto a diminutive cartridge once again. The auto-stereoscopic 3D display of the console meant the designers had to take extra care to make sure the new perspectives didn't reveal any behind-the-scenes graphical nastiness that we were never meant to see. The game launched in 2012 in Japan, and the following year everywhere else due to another monumental localization job. This time around, you're not just somebody selling seashells and fallen fruit in an already flooded market, but instead, upon arrival at your new town, you're greeted as the new mayor of this rural backwater, with the power to mold and shape the town and its inhabitants according to your whims. Being the mayor means you have the ability to change more of your town than ever before, and even dictate people's bedtimes to suit your own unhealthy schedule. Despite this being such an integral part of what made New Leaf, this idea was only decided on a year after the game had started development, as revealed in an Iwata Asks interview on the subject. In fact, it was an impending presentation to a couple of Nintendo honchos that birthed the idea of giving the player more control this time around. And with Tortimer booted from office, the next chapter of Animal Crossing had its unique selling point. The game was very well received, and in 2016, a full 3 years after its initial release, an updated version called Animal Crossing New Leaf Welcome Amiibo landed on store shelves. As the new title suggested, this was a revised version of the game that boasted new amiibo functionality and extra modes, including an expanded campsite, but those with the base game were able to simply update their original copy to include all the new features for free, thanks to the mysterious magic of the internet. Shortly before this updated version released, though, we saw the very first spin-off in the series. Known in Animal Crossing as Dharma dolls, these items are actually based off of Japanese folklore. The Ruma dolls are considered to be a kind of wishing doll. Basically, you write your dream or wish on the back of the doll and fill in one eye. Then, once you have fulfilled your wish or completed your dream, you fill in the other eye. It's cool that they included that in the game. Your friendly fishing tourney host, Chip, may look like a beaver, but he certainly doesn't act like one. Consider this. He gobbles down the fish you bring him, and in real life, beavers do not eat fish. They're plant eaters. Otters eat fish, and the way he slurps the fish down suggests he is more likely supposed to be a cross between an otter and a beaver. Why was Animal Crossing New Leaf called New Leaf? Well, there are a few reasons. It's not just because you, the player, become mayor of the town when you start. Many of the characters have literally turned over a new leaf by taking on different roles, or returning from being away from the series. For example, Tom Nook goes into real estate, LaBelle comes back to work with her sisters, Kix has his own shoe store, Brewster gets his own coffee shop, and finally, Dr. Shrunk runs a nightclub. Remember Mr. Rossetti, the mole with serious anger issues who blows a gasket if you don't save properly? He apparently scared the living daylights out of younger players, as revealed in an interview with Animal Crossing New Leaf's project leader, Ayakoyo Guko, alongside Nintendo's former president, the late Satoru Iwata. We really weren't sure about Mr. Rossetti, as he really divides people, Kayoguku said. Some people love him, of course, but there are others who don't like being shouted at in his rough accent. It seems like younger female players in particular are scared, Iwata agreed. I've heard that some of them have even cried. And so ends the tale of the famous life-simulating video game Animal Crossing, which lived happily ever after in the hearts of gamers across the world.